So thank you for joining us today for Domestic Departures. This is what we call our research convening, which happens every 2 years as a way of marking, I suppose, not necessarily completion, but some sort of way of sharing the work that happens through our research grants program. I think this year's convening is really bringing together people whose work helps us think about what we're experiencing in the present. Do any of us feel that we really have a right to our land, that we can feel safe, that it will last forever, be there for our future generations? In a time of siege, all we can offer is a multiplicity of perspectives and positions that are, in fact, rooted in precarity. We can learn from those who walk the earth, those who have lost their homes, and those who have never felt at home. Over the last 2 years, our team, Shama Nair in particular, and our research grantees, who you will all hear from today, have formed a sort of virtual community of thinkers who have collaborated extensively to bring together this convening. They've elected to disseminate their work through displays, workshops, and both experimental and performative presentations. They encourage you, as you will experience today, and through their projects, to get closer to and to learn from the ground itself. Thank you for joining us, and I will let Shama tell you more about each of their projects. So the way... Sorry. And we'll introduce each project before they present their work, just so that it stays present with you.
Thank you. Oh my God, the microphone. So before I start, I just want to extend some gratitude to everyone who worked on setting this symposium up, and also to Khaled El Jack, who helped me set up the visuals for this essay. And also to my brother Khaled, who was always around whenever I was abroad or away, sifting through my archives and going through everything very patiently, taking photos of everything and just being patient with me. So, yeah. And also bear with me as I literally conduct an orchestra with these two projectors. All right. My father has a habit of randomly texting us old family photos on WhatsApp. I cannot explain this habit with certainty, but I always find myself thinking, he must really miss me. I've been back in the country for 20 days now, and I've seen him for a total of 3 hours. 2 on the day of my arrival, and 1 barely yesterday morning. But his no-context messages of old pictures are a constant in my life. I don't know what it is about my family's desire to keep me in this country. I sometimes feel they're afraid of the prospect of being reintroduced to me. I keep wanting to say that I am not the same person I was when I was 17, but the truth is that person that I am today was there at 17, hidden deep in my core, tucked away fearfully and cleverly. Even though I didn't know that she was there, I somehow knew back then that I would end up here. And here is the liminality of incessant departures and arrivals. So let me start with the photo I always reshare of him and with him. It was last resent on the 21st of November in 2023, sometime right after my first round of archival research for this grant. In this digital image, I resist cropping out the background of the carpet, peeking behind the physical photograph that I held in my hand, because it reminds me of the way that I took it. Crouched down on the floor in an Asian squat, hair covering both sides of my face, cradling the photograph and attempting to block the light from reflecting on its shiny finish. He was 17 here, enrolled in an emergency conscription the UAE implemented after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990. He looks like my 22-year-old brother Majid, or the other way around. I wonder why he and I both carry the memory or the recalled memory of this photograph so gingerly and dearly. Many reflections, forwards, and re-forwards of this picture eventually make me realize that the tactile elements of this photograph adds to the reverence that was collectively and intergenerationally formed around it. The photograph has an odd shape, not the typical 35 photos, film photos my parents and their parents held onto in their endless decrepit family albums. It is slightly smaller and more squared, and its edges are oval and smooth. The color is a faded yellow hue. The oddness of its shape and color made it feel especially old, even though there were older photographs from the 80s of my dad and his friends setting up tents in the deserted parts of their old neighborhood. My family's collective love for this photo is definitely influenced by the contents of the photograph itself. So my father as a teenager, his tan, and his weird stance. Photography has always been a depictive device, but it is a detrimental thing to imagine it to only be that. Therefore, I start this essay by asserting the argument for the need to break, conceptually, the dominance of image content and look at the physical attributes of the photograph that influence content in the arrangement and projection of visual information. You can sit on the green as well if you'd like. There's so much space here. Come closer. So by plasticity, so broken down, I essentially highlight and grapple with two things: the plasticity or lack thereof of the photograph itself, as well as the presentational form of the image. By plasticity, I mean the description I just detailed above. So thinking of the shine and the flimsiness of the paper, the sepia-esque toning, and such technical choices paired with signs of old age and handling, that's like the slight chipping of the corners. All of these contribute to our subjective, embodied, and sensuous interactions with the object, the photograph, in the way it feels against our skin, the heuristic cues triggered by the coloring, signaling its uniqueness and importance. This is why the first remark uttered by anyone who ever sees it for the first time is, why is it a different size, along with, why does it look so old? The presentational form converses with the materiality of the image. If I were to locate the image using only my memory, it would be inside one of several Kodak albums, like this one depicting a mysterious tropical location. These albums would be stacked inside a rundown cardboard box that is patterned in blue and pink flowers, which is stored inside a drawer right under my bed, in my bedroom in Sharjah. I usually pull the entire box out of my drawer and lay it on the floor or on the long couch, usually next to my grandmother when the family is visiting. She would start flipping through before passing the albums down to the person on her right. It is usually a Friday, sometime after lunch and a few desserts, when the sun is setting or has already set. Different from being placed inside a pristine frame and hung on a wall or stored inside a cabinet display, the process of fishing this photograph out of the box feels like an excavation, a repetitive discovery that generates an element of surprise or wonder. Would someone like to read this for me? Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Keep going. So there's a lot to say about the grammar of the image and how it shifts based on the form through which it is presented. There's also a lot to say about my choice to lead with this photograph that is central to my understanding of my family's migration and movement to a public audience. I choose to share it via digital capture rather than showing you the original image or a copy print of it. I choose to present it via a projection on the blank scrolls of this convening, or semi-blank, and that changes your experience and subsequently your reading of it according to the hues and saturation of each projector lens layered by the ridges of the scrolls on this wall. I also make the obvious choice of removing the physical depiction of my father at 17. Again, the grammar shifts, communicating in different tones from when it is inside a box in a domestic space, to when it is shared via WhatsApp among family members, to when it is removed from its home environment to guide an essay reading about the importance of multisensory approaches to archives. In all of these contexts, the image possesses social salience, but the material form, in conversation with the actual image or its absence here, produces different meanings. So this practice of viewing materiality and tactility of the photograph alongside its content is a method through which I have learned to listen to photographic archives. In other words, materiality and tactility become a language that communicates with us. Importantly to my creative explorations, it also becomes a method and a tool for researchers and artists to relay, withhold, or subvert stories. To understand this better, I engage with a body of work from artists who work with photographs, either their own or derived from public archives, and the ways in which they have altered their presentation, form, or content to communicate political and personal messages. Artists Mohini Chandra and Zainab Singh both reference the histories of indentured labor under British colonial rule in Fiji and South Africa, respectively, by eliciting absence in photographs and archives to mark disappearances. Singh transfers archival photographs of figures and landscapes using sugar molasses on cotton. She references female indentured laborers harvesting sugarcane in KwaZulu-Natal under British colonial rule. The materiality of the transferred photograph viscerally and multisensorially depicts the colonial history through sight and imagined taste. Just as important is the presentation of it, placing it in a found vintage frame, often used in domestic spaces, alluding to the violence still felt and passed down generations of the South African Indian population. What's more important is the strong presence of the absence, with the woman being a silhouette, a methodology employed by Singh to highlight the ethical implication of perceiving a colonized subject whose consent we cannot get. The physical absence is socially salient, speaking to the absence of consent in grappling with colonial histories. Mohini Chandra's series, Imaginary Edens / Photos of My Father, gathers family archives, tracing every visual documentation of her father, whose ancestors were indentured laborers in Fiji, whose subsequent generations went on to run famous photography studios. A corporeal absence, Chandra turns her father's figure into silhouettes filled by patterned backgrounds from these photographic studios. She found these images in private family archives and kept elements of the content private by concealing her father's physicality and replacing it with a public part of her family, their relationship with photography in studios. So Chandra tells these stories of absence, diaspora, and loss in the impermanence of domesticity through layering textures and patterns against photographs, so an interplay between materials and image content. And many other artists who work with archives employ a method of concealment or selective revealing of content to communicate a socially salient message. I choose to follow this methodological line of concealing and revealing for this research project because it spoke to the original research question of how the domestic space encapsulates Ajami visual and material culture. So in the past 2 years, I explored the materiality of our domestic spaces, primarily through extensive and collective floor planning exercises of all the homes 3 generations of my family have lived in Kuwait and Sharjah. The floor planning exercises served as a vehicle through which collective memory was offered in conversations, and every recalled and retold memory existed within the domestic space and thus was collectively asserted to stay in the domestic space. So one of my primary concerns was to grapple with the reversibility of consent before a public audience, when and where to share some stories, images, and objects, and with whom. Some days, my father would show my friends this photo of him, and on other days, he'd insist that He'd rather it was a private family possession. And so this project was asking me to build a language through which visual and material imagery can be shared with reversible consent. In the print version of this essay, I plan to attach and detach the image content of my father in his uniform at 17 using Velcro, giving him the agency to choose to keep or remove himself from the image as it passes down family members in different conversations. Someone can jump in. This refusal to bring the private to the public sphere also speaks to the difficulty of linearizing and narrativizing memories of migration and belonging that are often fragmented, contradictory, and subjective. But nevertheless, image content is still important to understanding the social salience of a photo. So my choice to completely disregard it here is to commit the same fallacy as disregarding form and materiality. So, I offer you an elaboration on image content with the agency of describing it without having to reveal it. A public audience is thus asked to trust my choices to relay or not relay a story. You'll have to trust that this is a photograph of my father at 17, and that he looked unprepared to take the photo, eyes gazing at something right above the camera and mouth agape. You'll have to trust that he is wearing a military uniform, the sleeves folded to his elbows, and that his arms are placed right under his belt as if to retrieve something from his pocket. In our known archives, there is only one photo of him at this time, marked not by the mundane happenings of his life, such as spending time with his friends in Al-Batina or Al-Shahba, but by national precarity and the threat of war, to which he responded by opting in for conscription with all of his neighborhood friends. Anyone? In one of our many conversations about this picture, my paternal grandmother notes that she still has his uniform and his boots from that time. Neither of these things fit him anymore, so they are somewhat suspended in the past. So this reverence is also attributed to the image content. In the theater of consumption of this photograph in my households, my family turns a trivial act of posing in front of an old curtain to something more than mundane, but only when it makes its way out of the heaps of albums and boxes in my drawer. Even I questioned and investigated my intuitive choice to make this photograph the vehicle for this reflection. To me, it spoke potently of the way the public gaze seeps into the private space to celebrate a photo that tells a nationally resonant story, shared and known in the public space. And maybe, on a subconscious level, I also wanted to start with something recognizable and time-stamped in history, something I can explain with ease and clarity. Such is the urge to relay stories with a digestible linearity to them. What happens if I scramble all of this? If I begin from my starting point, a position that was intimidatingly ambiguous, punctured with many absences. I spent a lot of time staring at this drawer, emptying it, organizing photographs, and stacking them up again. Because of this drawer and the larger state of my childhood bedroom, I am perceived particularly by my aunts as a hoarder. My family finds my desire to collect all memorabilia something to aimlessly pollute the space, and what is dirt if not matter out of place? What happens if we linger around the marginal elements of a photograph or a physical object, the qualities that are less urgent or emergent, like texture and form? It is the trivial and the useless, the floor planning exercises with no grand goal or intention, the edges of a photograph, or the tangential stories that emerge during research that I found to be the most powerful and effective social forces. The photograph's hegemonic salience, i.e. the military uniform, and the content linked to national identity building, is distilled and subverted through veering at and centering the margins to understand its mere existence in the world, its ever-shifting social life. 2 years later, I find myself thinking about and embodying the physicality of the domestic space with more intentionality, after learning to listen to the photograph and after learning to listen to the materiality of the silently existing objects in the household. So, I conclude this essay with a series of tangents, turning to the mundane, the otherwise useless. 1. The fabric on my paternal grandmother's tables. It appeared in the backdrop of all the floor planning exercises and our daily tea and coffee combo catch-ups back when I lived at home. Flip phone, bedroom key, polarized lens sunglasses to cover her eyes post-surgery, tea and coffee cups, and a few pre-opened plastic water bottles. I do not remember a time where those stable fabrics were not in my life by proxy of being in my grandmother's possession. It speaks to the permanence of a home after a life of movement, perhaps in search of this. 2. Her papaya tree that was planted, sprouted, and died during the research grant period. It signals the passage of time as I spent endless days and hours in her home, as I always do, with long gaps during my time abroad. It speaks to our embodiment of this time, our stillness after relentless movement. What does that do to our bodies? How does it stretch our memories for miles across continents and generations? 3. My maternal grandmother's hoarding tendencies. Every time she leaves the country, my aunts do the same thing they do to my room of decluttering her home. Throwing out broken furniture, cleaning her nightstands, dusting the front yard from all the accumulated goat food she keeps around. She keeps all the old furniture her kids have abandoned in her goat farm in El-Madam, a 1-hour drive from her home. I've always been fascinated by it, and especially by the way she has saved enough scraps and door frames of old homes to build a makeshift goat house. This panicky hoarding must run in the family, but maybe it skips a generation. What does it mean to write about an ethnic identity defined by movement anyway? More importantly, what happens to the wanderers when they settle down? My hoarding brings me back to the desire for incessant departures and arrivals. In understanding the domesticity of wanderers, those who have faced in their movements erasure of claims to the public realm on both sides of the Gulf, I better understand that the way forward is not to attempt to reclaim it. The personal archive and the autoethnographic exploration insist on being powerfully useless, tucked away in some drawer, carefully and cleverly. Thank you. Right. That was 21 minutes. Sorry, I like to time myself when I'm speaking. Thank you guys so much for listening. I know there was a lot there, and there's a lot of information, and it was just one component of the larger research grant. I wanted to focus on the reflective and autoethnographic side of things, using one of the methods or using one of the kind of material that I use, which is the archives. The other stuff that I've done is floor planning exercises, thinking of more autoethnographic reflective tools like zine making and reversing the zine making process. So there are a lot of other things that we will unpack with time, but that is to be done tomorrow during the workshops where we have set up kind of a space, this space, to go through all of the tools and maybe just pass them down to an audience. Today, I'm joined by my two other collaborators, Hassan Arif and Reem Al-Bishr. Khalid couldn't be here today because he's doing his own thing, another workshop in Sharjah. But we're all here to kind of have a conversation about this and maybe unpack some of it. And I would love to hear your own tangents if you have any conversations or kind of ideas that you want to bounce off after this essay. Yeah, I want to open it up.